Hey, thanks for making it to Veterans Info Tap. I'm glad you made it. There is another projection put out by the Motley Fool for COLA, that cost of living adjustment, that pay increase. Remember, we are halfway, actually more than halfway through the 3-month period in which the Social Security Administration looks at to calculate COLA. Now, I'm also going to let you know that there are 2 different COLAs, cost of living adjustments, that the VA actually implements. One is mirroring the Social Security Administration's COLA, cost of living adjustment. Every year, Congress jumps in and says, hey, we authorize the VA to mirror the COLA for Social Security recipients, and then the VA just adopts that number. So that's one. The other, well, I guess it's important to say that COLA affects your VA compensation, pension, other various things, dependency indemnity compensation, and so forth. So there's another COLA that the VA implements, but they figure out that number themselves. And it goes into effect earlier. So October 1st is when that one goes into effect. We typically hear about it anytime within the next month or so. We should hear what it will be. Last year, it was 6.2%, and it directly impacts educational type benefits, employment benefits such as VRE, Veterans Readiness and Employment. The stipend that you receive if you're in that program was affected by that COLA, not the Social Security COLA. Chapter 35, education benefit, affected by the 6.2% COLA adjustment internal to the VA, not the Social Security Administration's version. So we have 2 different COLAs that get calculated. This COLA is the one that affects your VA compensation, pension, dependency indemnity compensation, that type of stuff. And again, this is by the Motley Fool. I'm going to read through it here and just share with you this news. I mean, we are almost 2/3 of the way through the data at this point. So with that being said, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, share with a friend, all that good stuff. I truly appreciate it. The 2 asks, that's really it. Hit the thumbs up and let the video run. If you want to support the channel in other ways, consider being a member. I really appreciate all of you members so much. Thank you. All right, so let's jump into this. The Social Security Cost of Living Adjustment COLA forecast for 2025 was just updated. There's good news and bad news for retirees. Now, obviously, the focus here is on Social Security recipients, those that are, typically retired and receiving their Social Security benefit. However, you can also insert VA disability compensation, right? So disabled veterans can also be inserted in there as well. So there are some key points. It says here, and then I'm going to jump into the article. So it says key points. There's 3 of them. The Senior Citizens League estimates that Social Security benefits will receive a 2.6% COLA next year, the smallest raise for retired workers since 2021. And again, VA just has to adopt whatever Social Security comes up with based on that data. Next one here is Social Security benefits have reportedly lost 20% of their purchasing power since 2010. I'm going to throw in a notation that if Social Security benefits reportedly lost 20% of their purchasing power since 2010, then so has VA compensation and the other various monetary benefits as pension or dependency indemnity compensation. Why? Because what they're looking at is they are basically alluding to the fact that inflation has done this and COLA has done this. So sure, they're both upward trends, but as time is going by, the gap is getting bigger and bigger between the adjustment and the actual inflation realized. So with that, that's what they're saying with that 20% of their purchasing power since 2010. And benefits will lose more buying power next year if the COLA underestimates inflation, right? So here we are. Next one, 3rd key point. Some experts believe COLA should be based off the CPI-E inflation rather than CPI-W inflation, but others believe the 2-figure The two figures average out over time. All right, so for those that don't know, there has been a couple pieces of legislation that have floated around regarding changing how COLA is calculated. Instead of using the current CPI-W, which is taking into account urban wage earners and all that good stuff, and moving it over to the CPI-E, which is the Consumer Price Index for elderly, different spending patterns, habits, and so forth, different needs versus wants, all that stuff. And what I have heard and read and looked at is if you took, say, the past 20 years, on average, the CPI-E would have warranted about a 20, about a quarter percent, about a 25 basis point increase versus the standard CPI-W. So it's not much, but it is higher. So the last thing here, it says that well, I guess it really doesn't say anything. So those are the three key points. Let's jump into the actual article here. So it goes on. Social Security 2025 cost of living adjustment is on pace to be the smallest raise for retired workers since 2021. Social Security benefits get annual cost of living adjustments to help beneficiaries. And again, Social Security insert veterans benefits, right? So Social Security and veterans benefits get an annual cost of living adjustment to help beneficiaries keep pace with the rising prices across the economy. Inflation has moderated in recent months. Okay, that's not good for, it's good and it's not, right? So costs are coming down. That means that the inflation, so they say, is coming down. And that means that your COLA will be less. So it's funny that it's happening in these months, right? Ha ha ha. Welcome to July, August, September. So anyway, inflation has moderated in recent months, and that trend is expected to continue. So the Senior Citizens League recently revised its 2025 COLA forecast downward, albeit modestly. The 2025 COLA prediction is about 2.57%, down from 2.63% last month, according to the Senior Citizens League statistician Alex Moore. The good news is that COLAs are rounded to the nearest tenth of a percent, so both estimates imply payouts will increase 2.6% in 2025. The bad news is that would be the smallest raise for retired workers, and again, retired workers, Social Security recipients, disabled veterans, surviving spouses, veterans on pension, all of those. Smallest since 2021. However, there are more serious problems. The Senior Citizens League estimates Social Security benefits have lost 20% of their purchasing power since 2010 because COLAs have consistently failed to keep pace with inflation. The accuracy of that figure is debatable, but other evidence supports the idea that benefits have lost purchasing power. I would say, well, okay, then what, right? You have a choice. You can just sit and complain, or you can actually, in numbers, right? One person doesn't mean much. But if we get a lot of people calling your congressional members, calling our chairman of the Veterans Committees and the ranking member of the committees for veterans on both the House and the Senate side, and let them know, right, how you feel about the fact that COLA calculated for disabled veterans sucks. And we have been behind the curve for way too long, and that needs to be adjusted. Will something happen? Maybe, maybe not. But the reality is that, again, there has been legislation floating around, and the VA does implement its own COLA, cost of living adjustment, for VRNE and for Chapter 35. It was 6.2%. Now, maybe they're just bringing it up to speed, but boy, that 6.2 would have been nice last year. Just saying, if it actually rolled out to everyone. All right, so let's move on. 2/3 of seniors surveyed by the Senior Citizens League this year said that the 2024 COLA failed to cover the increase in their basic household expenses. Additionally, 26% of retired workers surveyed by the Employee Benefit Research Institute said they lacked confidence in their ability to finance retirement. That was the second worst reading since 2015. Here's another interesting thing, right? COLA is calculated using the last quarter of the fiscal year, July, August, September, or the third quarter of the calendar year, whatever you want to call it. The bottom line is July, August, September. COLA is then announced once the September numbers come in, which is typically, around the, into the second week of October, and then they announce the COLA figures. So what's crazy is we do this in a 3-month little snapshot, then we decide how much we're going to get for an increase. Then that increase doesn't even get implemented until December 1st, which you don't really see that in a payment until your January 1st payment. So you have months going by after COLA is calculated, and if inflation skyrockets or shoots up after September, doesn't matter, right? So effectively what happens is you're behind the ball before you even get your increase to begin with. It's a horrible system. It needs to be revamped. All right, moving on. Unfortunately, Social Security 2025 COLA may once again underestimate inflation, meaning benefits could lose more buying power next year. What are your thoughts on that, by the way? So moving on, Social Security benefits could lose buying power in 2025. Theoretically, annual cost of living adjustments protect the buying power. I love that they started that with theoretically. Annual cost of living adjustments protect the buying power of Social Security benefits and, yep, that's right, veterans benefits too. By ensuring payouts increase at the same pace as inflation. But again, this is the trajectory, right? So the inflation's doing this, meanwhile COLA's doing this. Sure, they're both upward trends, but there is a gap, and that gap gets bigger every year. So the COLA applied to benefits in any given year is equivalent to the percent increase in the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, the CPI-W, during the third quarter of the previous year, meaning the 3-month period between July and September. For that reason, the official 2025 COLA cannot be calculated until the third quarter CPI-W data is available in October. The CPI-W is a subset of the Consumer Price Index that measures inflation based on the spending patterns of hourly workers. Which is weird, right? Which is weird that they would base it on that when it's Social Security recipients, which typically don't work, and if they do, it's extremely part-time, or they're completely retired. But that's what they're going to base it upon. It makes no sense. So inflation is a subset of the Consumer Price Index that measures inflation based on the spending habits and patterns of hourly workers. But that methodology makes little sense, considering workers tend to be young people who spend money differently from retirees on Social Security. For instance, retired workers typically spend more on housing and medical care and less on education and transportation. For that reason, several policy analysts and advocacy groups believe COLA should be based on a different subset of the Consumer Price Index for the elderly, the CPI-E. Again, if this is something that you think makes sense, maybe reach out to your congressional member and let them know. The CPI-E measures inflation based on the spending patterns of individuals aged 62 and older, which theoretically makes it a better gauge of how pricing pressures across the economy impact Social Security recipients. CPI-E better reflects the change in prices that older adults face, according to Richard Johnson, director of the Program on Retirement Policy at the Urban Institute. Similarly, the Senior Citizens League and AARP, formerly the American Association of Retired Persons, have also expressed support for the CPI-E, as have numerous politicians. Indeed, over a dozen bills introduced in Congress during the last decade stipulated that COLAs should be based on the CPI-E. Unfortunately, the CPI-E Unfortunately, if the CPI-E is truly a better gauge of inflation for Social Security recipients, then benefits are on pace to lose buying power in 2025. I say that because the CPI inflation has exceeded CPI-W inflation every month this year. So, if you look at the average through January through July, so this calendar year, January through July, the average CPI-W inflation is 3.1%. The average CPI-E inflation is 3.5%. So this would be a 0.4% difference between the two, or 40 basis points, which is fairly substantial. I mean, and if you think about a number like that, not in the given year, right? That's kind of small. But when you compound it year over year over year over year, it actually becomes something very substantial. Moving on. As shown above, CPI-E inflation outpaced CPI-W inflation by 0.4 of a percentage point through the first 7 months of the year. If the CPI-E is more accurate, if the CPI-E is a more accurate metric, then Social Security's 2025 COLA is on pace to be 0.4 of a percent point too small. That means benefits will lose buying power next year, provided that the trend persists through September, which would mark the end of the third quarter of the calendar year. A small silver lining for Social Security recipients: not all Social Security experts believe COLAs should be calculated differently. Alicia Munnell, director of the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College, co-authored a paper in 2021 showing that CPI-E inflation was nearly identical to CPI-W inflation between 2002 and 2021. Additionally, Munnell told CNBC in 2022 that benefit increases based on the CPI-W will fully compensate for inflation over time. Much ado has been made about the discrepancy between the CPI-E and the CPI-W in 2023. Specifically, the CPI-W increased 3.2% in the third quarter last year, so Social Security benefits got 3.2% COLA this year. But the CPI-E increased 4%. But the CPI increased 4% in the third quarter last year, meaning Social Security benefits would have increased 4% had the COLA been based on the CPI-E. Again, if you agree with utilizing the CPI-E, now granted this is just data on a few different notes here, but if this is something that you think you should be looking into, maybe do a little research and then let your congressional member know how you feel. However, if Munnell is correct, that discrepancy will average out in time. That doesn't put extra money in retirees' pockets today, but it is a small silver lining because it suggests that the situation will eventually improve. I don't know if I fully agree based on the stuff that I've seen and read. Now, granted, I'm not researching anything too deep, but I think that if you had to compare the two over the past 20 years, you're going to come out a little ahead with the CPI-E. Again, what I had found was about 0.25%, a 0.25 difference, or 25 basis points. So, moving on, the $22,924 Social Security bonus most retirees completely overlook. I'm not sure what this is about. I'm just going to read a little headline here, and then we'll just end this out. It says, if you're like most Americans, you're a few years or more behind on your retirement savings, but a handful of little-known Social Security secrets could help ensure a boost in your retirement income. For example, one easy trick could be that you pay off as much as $22,924 more each year, or excuse me. For example, one easy trick could pay you as much as $22,924 more each year. That sounds funky to me. I don't know. Once you learn how to maximize your Social Security benefits, we think you could retire confidently with peace of mind that we're all after. Simply click here. So basically it's an ad. So that ad is basically going to talk about tax strategies and not paying taxes. Essentially, is what it's probably going to be, and making sure that your income falls into certain limits and all that stuff. I don't receive Social Security, so those of you out there that know a little more than I do on the Social Security aspect, please chime in. I appreciate it if you hung on till the end. With that, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Have a great one, and remember, if we don't take care of each other, something went wrong.